When the world hears the word gangster, images of fast cars, designer suits, stacks of cash, and dangerous power come to mind. But what happens when the kingpins of the underworld lose their freedom and step inside a cell? For some, prison is supposed to be the end, a final cage where even the most feared names are broken down into numbers. Yet, for others, prison becomes something else entirely, a new battlefield, a new empire, and sometimes a place where their legend only grows stronger. The fall of a gangster is never quiet. It comes with flashing lights, police sirens, and headlines screaming across newspapers and television screens. For years, these men had lived above the law, untouchable, feared by rivals, and respected by those who depended on their money and power. But when the handcuffs finally close around their wrists, the image of invincibility cracks. A mob boss in $1,000 suit is suddenly pushed into the back of a police car, surrounded not by loyal soldiers, but by officers ready to strip away every piece of control he once held. The descent into prison begins long before the steel doors close. It starts with the trial, the endless days in court where the gangster becomes a public spectacle. The same newspapers that once wrote about his power now dissect every detail of his fall. Cameras capture his smirk, his silence, his handcuffs. Some of them walk in proud, like John Gotti, who treated the courtroom like a stage and the trial like a performance. He wore tailored suits, slicked back hair, and carried himself as though the verdict could never touch him. But when the guilty verdict finally came, when the jury sealed his fate, the transformation from feared boss to prisoner began. For Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, the trial was less about showmanship and more about inevitability. He had escaped Mexican prisons through tunnels and bribery, but the United States was different. Here he was isolated, silenced, and his empire reduced to whispers. For Al Capone, the courtroom humiliation of being sentenced for tax evasion was a punishment almost worse than the prison walls themselves. To the world, it was a joke. The great gangster brought down not by bullets, but by accountants. The first steps into prison are always the same, no matter the legend or the empire outside. The clothes are stripped away, the jewelry, the watch, the custom suits, gone, replaced by a number, a uniform, and a thin mattress. The cell is small, the walls unkind, and the sound of the steel door slamming echoes louder than any gunshot. A man who once controlled hundreds of soldiers, who once dined in the finest restaurants, now shares space with concrete, metal, and silence. The guards do not care about the reputation. To them, he is just another inmate, another body to keep in line. But the other prisoners know. They always know. The whispers spread quickly. The boss is here. For a gangster, prison is both a threat and an opportunity. It strips away the comforts, but it also offers a new arena for survival. Some crumble. They cannot bear the loss of freedom, the humiliation of being locked in a cage. They spend their days in silence, their names fading from memory. But others, the true survivors, treat prison like another territory to conquer. They build networks. They buy influence. They use fear and respect the same way they did on the streets. Money still talks, even behind bars. Cigarettes, food, favors, everything has value. Guards can be bribed, inmates can be controlled, and a man who once ruled cities can still rule a cell block. Prison has its own hierarchy, and reputation is the first currency. A mob boss who arrives inside already carries weight. Men who feared him outside continue to fear him within. The stories of his power, his murders, his escapes, all feed the myth. Inmates who grew up hearing his name now see him in flesh, walk in the yard, and they know instinctively where the power lies. Even in chains, his legend commands respect. But legends are also targets. A gangster in prison is never truly safe. Rivals see an opportunity to strike. A man weakened by walls is vulnerable to knives, fists, and betrayal. The same paranoia that ruled his life outside follows him inside, and every glance, every whisper, every sudden move becomes a threat. The first nights are the hardest. The noise of clanging doors, the shouts of inmates, the smell of sweat and metal, everything is alien. For a man used to silence in his penthouse, the chaos of prison life is overwhelming. Sleep does not come easily. The mattress is thin, the toilet is in plain sight, and privacy is a dream. Yet slowly the adaptation begins. A gangster learns who to trust, who to bribe, and who to avoid. He studies the rhythms of the yard, the rules of the block, the loyalties of the gangs inside. And just like on the streets, survival depends on strategy. The day-to-day life of a gangster in prison is a contradiction. On one hand, he is stripped of freedom, watched at every moment, told when to eat, when to sleep, when to move. On the other hand, he often finds ways to bend those rules. Contraband becomes the hidden language of power. Cell phones are smuggled in, allowing contact with the outside world. Drugs and alcohol find their way past the guards, sold and traded in the shadows. Some bosses manage to live in comfort, bribing guards for better meals, softer beds, even visits that should never be allowed. Others remain trapped in harsher realities, fighting daily battles for respect and survival. Violence is never far away. In the world of prison, a gangster is always one wrong move from blood. The yard becomes a battlefield where alliances are tested and enemies wait for weakness. Stabbings happen quickly, fights erupt over debts, and a man's reputation can crumble in an instant. But for the true bosses, violence is a tool, not a fear. They use it to send messages, to remind everyone that their power is not gone, only transformed. A whispered order, a nod in the yard, and an enemy is silenced. Even in chains, influence kills. Isolation is another weapon used against them. Some prisons keep high-profile gangsters in solitary confinement, 23 hours a day inside a concrete box. No contact, no voices, no sunlight. It is meant to break them, to strip away every ounce of control. For many, it works. Solitary eats at the mind, turning days into endless loops of silence and madness. But some gangsters endure, hardened by years of paranoia and discipline. They turn the solitude into planning time, into reflection, into a new way to command. Letters go out through lawyers, orders pass in coded language, and the empire continues, even from within a 6x9 cell. The psychological shift of prison life is profound. A man who once gave orders now must follow them. A man who once ruled over others now waits for a guard to open his door. Yet, deep inside, the instinct to dominate never dies. The gangster watches, waits, and finds the cracks in the system. He learns which guard is weak, which inmate is loyal, which rules can be bent. Over time, the cell becomes less of a cage and more of a throne from which he commands his smaller empire. Stories circulate of gangsters living like kings, even behind bars. Meals delivered, phones hidden, meetings held in coded whispers. But there are also stories of collapse, of men who lose their minds in isolation, who crumble under the weight of humiliation, who die forgotten in their cells. Prison is the great divider between the myth and the man. Some prove their strength by surviving, by adapting, by keeping their names alive. Others vanish, their legends fading like smoke. For the gangster, prison is never just prison. It is another chapter in the story of power, survival, and fear. Some walk out years later, older, wiser, and ready to reclaim their place. Others never leave, their lives ending in the same concrete walls where they once plotted their survival. But for the outside world, the fascination never fades. We watch, we read, we wonder. What does it mean when the kings of the underworld are stripped of their crowns and forced to live like the rest of us? And the answer, always, is that they never truly live like the rest of us. Even behind bars, a gangster is still a gangster. Inside the walls of prison, survival is not only about the strength of the body, but the strength of reputation. For ordinary inmates, the first days are a scramble to find protection, to align themselves with a group, to understand the invisible rules that govern life behind bars. For gangsters, especially the ones whose names carry weight outside, the game begins the moment they walk in. Their reputation precedes them. Other inmates whisper their name. Guards exchange glances, and even the walls seem to echo with the stories that followed them inside. But reputation is both a shield and a target. It grants respect, sometimes even fear, but it also paints a bullseye on their back. Everyone knows who the gangster is, and everyone watches to see whether he will stand tall or fall like any other man. Prison hierarchy is as rigid as the one on the streets. There are the strong, the weak, the predators, and the prey. For mob bosses and cartel leaders, the natural instinct is to rise to the top, to command rather than obey. They bring with them the same code of power they lived by outside: respect, fear, and loyalty. And those who have money left, those whose empires continue to generate cash even while they sit in a cell, have an advantage that most inmates can never touch. Money moves in silence through relatives, through lawyers, through corrupt officers who see opportunity in the boss's desperation. That money buys favors, better food, better treatment, better access. It buys safety when safety cannot be guaranteed. It buys silence when secrets must be kept. On the prison yard, power is measured differently. On the outside, flashy cars, mansions, and suits showed status. Inside, it is the ability to control who walks where, who eats first, who has access to contraband. Cigarettes, drugs, phones, even a small blade hidden inside a shoe. These are the treasures of prison life. The gangster who can supply these things, who can guarantee protection or deliver punishment, becomes a ruler in his own right. The bosses who adapt learn quickly that the cell block is not much different from the neighborhood corner or the cartel stronghold. It is a microcosm of the streets, condensed and intensified. Every interaction, every look, every rumor has weight. Violence enforces order. No matter the reputation, no matter the money, a gangster cannot avoid the reality that power in prison must be shown. A debt unpaid, a challenge left unanswered, a rival emboldened by silence. These are invitations to chaos. The bosses who survive understand that brutality, calculated and decisive, is necessary. They do not need to throw the first punch. Their men do it for them. Inmates desperate for favor carry out assaults, stabbings, intimidation. A simple nod, a whispered order, and a message is sent across the yard that the boss still rules. Even the guards notice. They may look the other way, unwilling to involve themselves in a war they cannot win, or they may tighten security, isolating the gangster in an attempt to cut off his influence. But power has a way of slipping through cracks, even the cracks in concrete walls. There are countless stories of gangsters shaping prison life to their will. Some Mexican cartel leaders are said to have recreated small versions of their luxury on the inside, bribing guards to bring them meals, liquor, even women. In certain prisons in Latin America, bosses are rumored to run entire wings, setting schedules, collecting taxes from other inmates, and ruling with the same iron fist they wielded outside. In the United States, it is harder. The system is harsher, the surveillance tighter, and the punishments for corruption more severe. But even there, power finds its way. Mob bosses in federal facilities have been known to secure private meetings under the guise of legal visits, to send coded letters through lawyers to continue managing their families from behind bars. Still, prison is not without its humiliations. The gangster who once commanded armies now waits in line for food, eats off a plastic tray, and endures strip searches. Guards speak to him like to any other inmate, calling him by number, not by name. For men who built their lives on respect, the casual disrespect of prison life is its own kind of torture. Some accept it with cold silence, others with violent rebellion, and some attempt to manipulate even the guards, offering bribes, promises, or threats to remind them that this inmate is not like the rest. The alliances inside are delicate. In some prisons, racial divisions dictate everything. Who sits where? Who shares a cell? Who can walk with whom in the yard? A gangster who ignores these invisible lines risks everything. Even bosses must navigate these rules carefully, often aligning with groups they never worked with on the outside. In American prisons, Italian mobsters sometimes found themselves dealing with African American gangs, Hispanic crews, or outlaw bikers. Deals are struck, protection is exchanged, and new networks are born. A prison alliance can be more binding than one on the street because in a cage, trust is tested daily by survival. But power in prison is not eternal. The system has weapons of its own. Solitary confinement, the so-called hole, is used to strip away influence. A gangster locked alone for 23 hours a day cannot walk the yard, cannot meet with allies, cannot send orders as freely. For some, this breaks them. The silence, the isolation, the endless hours staring at concrete walls erode the mind. Others adapt. They write letters. They memorize codes. They plot futures that may never come. Some even find twisted comfort in the isolation, relishing the time to plan without interruption, to build fantasies of escape or revenge. The United States perfected a different kind of control with its supermax prisons. Facilities like ADX Florence in Colorado are designed to crush even the strongest. Inmates are confined alone, their contact with the outside world reduced to almost nothing. Even communication with lawyers is monitored, visits are rare, and phone calls nearly impossible. For gangsters used to commanding armies, it is the purest form of exile. El Chapo Guzman, once known for escaping Mexican prisons with tunnels and bribes, found himself trapped in Florence, locked away in a place designed to hold the most dangerous men on earth. His empire could no longer hear his voice. His family could no longer feel his presence. The escaped king had finally met a cage that would not open. And yet, even in the darkest corners of confinement, legends grow. Stories spread among inmates of the gangster who never bowed, who kept his dignity even when stripped of everything. Some men become symbols inside, admired for their defiance, respected for their resilience. For the younger inmates, meeting such a figure in the yard, even for a brief moment, is like meeting a myth in flesh. That respect, that aura, becomes another form of survival. But prison also exposes the frailties hidden behind the legend. The gangster who seemed invincible outside can be broken inside. Al Capone, once the terror of Chicago, ended his days in prison a sick man, his mind unraveling from untreated disease. John Gotti, the dapper Don, once the face of Mafia arrogance, suffered in solitary confinement, his health deteriorating until he died behind bars. These images of once powerful men reduced to shadows of themselves serve as grim reminders that no empire is eternal, no reputation untouchable. Yet, despite the falls, despite the humiliations, prison often fails to erase the myth completely. If anything, it sometimes magnifies it. The gangster becomes larger than life because of the stories told about him inside. The tales of how he walked into prison without fear, how he bent guards to his will, how he ran operations from a cell. They add to the legend that follows him long after he is gone. On the streets, his name still carries weight, whispered by those who admire, those who fear, and those who dream of following in his footsteps. Inside the cell blocks, life moves in rhythms of power and survival. The gangster who adapts can live like a king in chains, ruling with words instead of bullets, influence instead of armies. The one who fails is consumed by the system, forgotten among thousands of nameless inmates. But for every gangster who falls, another rises, another legend enters the gates, and the cycle begins again. Prison is not the end. It is the transformation. It strips away the luxury and exposes the raw core of power. It forces the gangster to prove once again what he always claimed, that he is different, stronger, untouchable. For some, prison is the graveyard of empires. For others, it is simply another throne made of steel and concrete, where their legend continues to grow. The days inside a prison move slowly, but the life of a gangster behind those walls is never without intensity. Every sunrise carries with it a new negotiation, a new test of loyalty, a new threat that must be neutralized before it takes root. For the gangster, prison is not simply about doing time. It is about maintaining relevance. Outside, the world does not pause. Rivals move in, authorities tighten their grip, and the empire he once built risks collapsing without his guidance. From inside his cell, he must still find a way to reach out, to pull strings, to remind the world that his hand is not entirely gone. Communication becomes the lifeline of power. Letters written in invisible codes, messages passed through lawyers, whispers carried during visiting hours. All of these become weapons sharper than knives. In some cases, entire operations are orchestrated through these channels. A phrase casually spoken during a family visit might signal a major drug shipment. A letter disguised as personal writing might conceal instructions for a hit. Prison walls are built to contain the body, but they cannot fully contain influence, especially when a gangster is determined to remind the world that he still commands authority. Still, not every gangster manages to keep their grip. Some are betrayed by those they trusted most. their messages intercepted, their orders ignored. Others discover that the loyalty they purchased on the outside does not always translate to loyalty on the inside. Time changes people. Soldiers grow impatient. Lieutenants begin to carve out their own power, and competitors seize opportunities to rise. The gangster must learn to operate in two worlds at once, the confined world of prison politics and the restless, shifting world beyond the gates. Inside, daily survival requires a mastery of patience. Meals are served at fixed hours, each one bland, monotonous, and far beneath the taste of a man who once dined in luxury. The food is more than sustenance. It is a reminder of the fall, of what has been lost. Some gangsters refuse to accept this humiliation. With money, they can manipulate the menu, bribing guards or kitchen staff to bring them outside meals, smuggling in treats that restore a sense of power. Others adapt in different ways, turning even the meager prison rations into rituals of dominance. Who sits where in the cafeteria? Who eats first? Who controls the tables? These small details become emblems of control. Recreation is another battlefield. The yard is a stage where strength must be displayed, but never too openly. A gangster cannot afford to seem weak, but he also cannot draw too much attention from the authorities. Workouts become symbolic, a declaration that the body is still strong, that time has not eroded the toughness that built his reputation. On the basketball court or weight benches, alliances are reaffirmed, messages exchanged, plans whispered beneath the noise of competition. Yet the yard is also where ambushes happen. A walk under the sun can turn into a deadly trap if vigilance falters. Every step outside the cell is calculated, every glance measured, every handshake weighed for hidden intentions. For some, the years of confinement awaken an unexpected side. Removed from the endless rush of money, drugs, and violence, a few gangsters turn inward. They write, they read, they study the law, hoping for loopholes that might free them. Some reinvent themselves as philosophers of survival, crafting memoirs that blend truth with myth. These writings, when smuggled out or published, fuel their legend even further. The world outside consumes their words, fascinated by the idea of a gangster reflecting on his crimes and his time behind bars. Whether genuine or carefully calculated, these transformations give the gangster a new weapon, the power of narrative. But prison is also a place where trust dies slowly, if at all. Betrayal lurks in every corner. Informants are everywhere. Other inmates desperate for a shorter sentence, guards eager for promotions, even allies who decide that their loyalty has an expiration date. To survive, the gangster must become a master of reading intentions. A careless slip of the tongue, a gesture too friendly, a glance held too long, any of these could reveal a traitor. And when betrayal is uncovered, punishment must be swift, even if it risks further isolation. The gangster cannot allow weakness to be associated with his name. A single act of mercy may be seen as vulnerability, and vulnerability is blood in the water. Family ties complicate everything. A gangster's wife, children, parents, all become part of the prison struggle. They are the ones who visit, who accept calls, who carry messages knowingly or unknowingly to the outside. For some families, loyalty holds strong. They endure the years. They sacrifice. They wait. For others, the wait becomes too much. Wives leave, children grow distant, parents age and die. Each loss strikes harder when endured behind bars, where grief must be swallowed in silence. Some gangsters take these losses as fuel for greater defiance, refusing to let sorrow break them. Others crumble, their spirit eaten away by the distance and the inevitability of time. Religion often finds its way into this world. Some turn to faith as a shield against despair, finding solace in prayer or ritual. Others use religion as a tool, aligning with religious groups inside to build protection or form new alliances. The sincerity of these conversions is often debated. Are they real acts of repentance or simply another mask of survival? For the gangster, it hardly matters. Whether faith is genuine or strategic, it becomes another weapon in the arsenal of survival. Not all gangsters live in the shadows of fear. Some embrace the spotlight even behind bars. They grant interviews. They allow documentaries. They speak through intermediaries to ensure that their name continues to resonate outside. In a paradoxical way, prison can transform them into celebrities, their myth magnified by the very fact that they are locked away. The walls become part of their story, symbols of their resilience. A photograph taken in prison uniform can become as iconic as one taken in a tailored suit, a reminder that even in chains, they are larger than life. Yet, there is always the quiet enemy of time. No matter the alliances, the bribes, the displays of strength, time wears away at even the most defiant soul. Days bleed into weeks, weeks into years, years into decades. The gangster who once strode confidently through the yard begins to feel the weight in his bones. Health falters, hair grays, hands tremble. For some, this is the cruelest punishment of all, the body betraying the image of invincibility. Guards who once feared them now treat them with indifference, and younger inmates see them not as threats, but as relics. The empire outside has moved on. New names rise, new legends are written, and the gangster becomes a memory fading inside a cage. But even in the twilight of their prison lives, some refuse to be forgotten. They cling to the rituals of power, to the small victories that remind them they were once kings. A cigarette smuggled in, a meal better than the rest, a whispered order that still carries weight. These become enough. In those moments, however fleeting, the gangster tastes again the life he once commanded, and for many, that is all that matters. Prison reshapes every gangster differently. Some are broken, their will shattered until they are mere shadows of the men they once were. Others adapt, turning cages into command centers, ruling through whispers and codes. And some, perhaps the rarest, find in prison a strange form of clarity. Stripped of wealth, of soldiers, of constant war, they see themselves clearly for the first time. Whether they embrace this clarity or are destroyed by it depends on the man. But the truth remains. Prison is not simply a place of punishment. For gangsters, it is a crucible. It burns away illusions, tests the strength of identity, and leaves behind either ashes or something harder, sharp, unbreakable. And so, as the years pass, the gangster inside learns the only law that never changes. Survival belongs not to the strongest or the richest, but to the one who adapts. In the end, that adaptation is the true measure of a gangster's legacy. Power in prison is not always measured in violence alone. For a gangster, true control lies in the ability to bend the system itself, to turn guards into allies, to transform rules into opportunities. Behind the steel bars and locked gates, corruption thrives like an unspoken economy, and the gangster knows better than anyone how to invest in it. Money does not vanish at the prison gates. It changes form, slipping into hidden hands, exchanged for favors that shift the balance of survival. A single guard, underpaid and resentful of his long hours, can become a crucial partner. At first, the favors are small: extra food, longer phone calls, a cigarette smuggled past the metal detectors. But each transaction builds trust, a bond forged in secrecy. Soon, the same guard might be delivering contraband phones, orchestrating visits, or even looking the other way during violent acts. For the gangster, this is business as usual, no different than paying off a cop or judge on the outside. For the guard, it is both temptation and trap, a line crossed that can never be undone. Prison economies flourish in shadows. A single pack of cigarettes can buy loyalty. A hidden stash of drugs can control entire cell blocks. Gangsters, used to commanding vast fortunes, quickly learn to manipulate this miniature economy with precision. They convert outside resources into inside power. Families bring in money, lawyers carry coded instructions, allies on the outside ensure that funds flow where they need to. Every transaction behind bars echoes the old streets. The hustle remains the same, only the scale has changed. Yet, corruption is not foolproof. Every smuggled phone, every paid-off guard, every hidden deal carries risk. Authorities monitor, investigate, and adapt. Raids come suddenly, cells are overturned, possessions are confiscated, and trust is shattered. Still, the gangster plays the long game. He knows that systems are not flawless, that men can always be bought, that fear and greed are constants. If one pipeline closes, another is opened. It is a relentless dance between authority and defiance, a reminder that control is never absolute, only borrowed. Beyond corruption, another form of power reveals itself: alliances with other inmates. No gangster, no matter how feared, survives alone. The prison is a jungle, divided by race, religion, and gang affiliation. The gangster must navigate this landscape with the same cunning he used on the streets. Every handshake is a negotiation, every shared meal a pact. Sometimes old enemies become new allies, united by common threats. At other times, friendships dissolve in betrayal when the stakes shift. Rivalries inside prison can be more dangerous than those outside. On the streets, a gangster has soldiers, weapons, and safe houses. Behind bars, the battlefield is tighter, the weapons cruder, the consequences immediate. A shank made from metal scrap, a razor hidden in a toothbrush, a lock in a sock. These become instruments of war. Violence erupts suddenly, in the cafeteria, in the showers, in the yard. A single mistake can mean a swift, brutal death. And yet, the gangster thrives in this environment, for he understands that fear is the most valuable currency of all. The legend of a gangster grows even inside prison walls. Stories of past murders, escapes, and deals echo among inmates like myths. Younger prisoners idolize them, seeking protection or mentorship. Some gangsters exploit this hero worship, building small armies that carry out their will. Others prefer to remain distant, cultivating an aura of untouchable power. Either way, their names carry weight, often more than the official ranks of prison authorities. But not every gangster can adapt. Some, stripped of their empires, find themselves powerless without the trappings of wealth and soldiers. Depression consumes them. They become isolated, easy prey for stronger inmates, their reputations collapsing under the reality of confinement. For these men, prison is not just punishment. It is a slow erasure of everything they once were. They fade into anonymity, forgotten by the streets that once sang their names. Meanwhile, others reinvent themselves completely. Some turn prison into a stage for reform, presenting themselves as reformed men, willing to guide troubled youth away from the life they once embraced. They grant interviews, write books, and transform their criminal history into lessons. Whether this redemption is sincere or another performance hardly matters. The world is fascinated. Society consumes these stories eagerly, torn between admiration for their survival and condemnation of their crimes. The gangster who continues to hold power often does so through fear cloaked in strategy. He knows when to show force and when to hold back, when to let others believe they have won, and when to remind them who truly controls the strings. Inside prison, the balance of violence and diplomacy is delicate. Too much bloodshed draws the wrath of authorities. Too much weakness invites predators. Only the careful walk the line long enough to remain untouchable. Over time, even the most powerful gangster must confront the limits of his reach. Prison is relentless in its erosion of pride. Visits grow fewer, calls become shorter, money dries up, and the empire outside shifts into the hands of others. For some, this reality fuels desperate escapes. Tales of tunnels dug beneath cells, helicopters swooping into yards, guards overpowered, all are part of gangsta folklore. A few succeed, vanishing into the world outside to rebuild their empires. Most fail, caught or killed, their attempted escape becoming one more story that cements their legend. In the end, prison life for a gangster is a mirror. It reflects not just the crimes of the past, but the essence of the man himself. Some crumble, others adapt, a few thrive. The walls strip away illusions and reveal whether power was built on true strength or borrowed from circumstance. For every gangster who maintains control behind bars, there are dozens who lose everything, consumed by the very system they once defied. And yet, the fascination persists. The image of a gangster in prison is paradoxical. Once feared kings of the streets reduced to caged men, yet somehow still commanding respect, still weaving influence, still writing their names into history. It is this contradiction that makes their stories timeless, that ensures people will always watch, always wonder, always ask, what really happens when the world's most dangerous men are locked away? The prison walls were never meant to break, yet history is filled with moments when the impossible happened. For gangsters, confinement is never accepted as fate. It is simply another challenge, another enemy to outsmart. From the moment the gates shut, plans begin to form. Maps are drawn from memory. Guards are studied like prey. Weaknesses are cataloged. Even the thickest concrete and the highest towers cannot fully kill the dream of freedom. For a gangster, prison is a cage, but cages can be broken. There are stories whispered in every cell block, legends passed from inmate to inmate, tales of tunnels carved over months with spoons and stolen tools, of beds stuffed with pillows to fool guards during midnight counts, of helicopters swooping in under the cover of night to snatch prisoners from the yard. Some of these stories are myths, exaggerated into folklore, but some are chillingly true. Escapes have happened, and when they do, they carry the weight of legend. For the gangster who manages to slip away even briefly, his reputation soars. The streets speak of him in awe. He becomes more than a criminal. He becomes a ghost, an outlaw who defied the unbreakable fortress. Yet escape is not just about glory, it is desperation fueled by the knowledge that time eats away at power. Every year behind bars is a year lost on the streets, a year for rivals to seize empires, for family ties to loosen, for fear to fade. A gangster who was once untouchable risks becoming a memory. For some, the thought of dying behind bars is unbearable. Freedom is not just a dream. It is survival. It is legacy. It is proof that no chain can hold them. Still, most attempts fail. Sirens wail, guards open fire, and fugitives are hunted down with relentless force. Some are killed before they even reach the prison walls. Others taste freedom for hours or days before being dragged back in chains, punished with harsher conditions, locked deeper into the system. But even these failures add to the myth. The very act of trying is enough to remind the world that the gangster will never accept defeat quietly. For those who cannot escape, riots become another weapon. A prison riot is chaos incarnate, fires burning, alarms blaring, inmates flooding corridors in a wave of fury. For the authorities, riots are nightmares. For gangsters, they are opportunities. In the smoke and confusion, power can shift, messages can be sent, enemies can be eliminated under the cover of disorder. A riot is not just rage, it is strategy. Some gangsters orchestrate them with precision, using the chaos to assert dominance, to remind everyone inside and outside that they still command respect. But riots also carry costs. Innocent inmates are caught in the violence, guards are injured or killed, and crackdowns follow swiftly. Solitary confinement, lockdowns, tighter controls, these are the punishments that follow the flames. Yet, even under these measures, the gangster mentality adapts. Solitary cells become places of reflection or of plotting. Even with only four walls and silence, the mind of a gangster refuses to surrender. As the years pass, however, even the strongest wills are forced to confront a new enemy, time itself. Muscles weaken, bones ache, and diseases creep in. The gangster who once ruled with fists and fire now struggles to climb onto his bunk. The swagger that once made guards nervous and inmates respectful is replaced with the shuffle of age. For some, this is the harshest sentence of all. Not the bars, not the guards, but the betrayal of their own bodies. Prison hospitals are cold places, filled with the coughs of old men who were once feared names. Gangsters who commanded empires are now hooked to IV drips, their voices weakened, their eyes dim. Some are wheeled down corridors in silence, barely recognized by younger inmates who only know their names from old stories. To the new generation, they are relics, fading figures of a past era. But for those who remember, the sight is haunting. To see a man who once controlled cities reduced to frailty is a reminder that no empire is eternal. Yet even in decline, some gangsters cling to power. They use their wisdom as currency, advising younger inmates, manipulating politics without lifting a hand. Their strength is gone, but their minds remain sharp, and influence flows through whispers rather than force. Some turn to writing, crafting memoirs that shape how the world remembers them. Others embrace religion, preaching redemption while quietly maintaining their reputations. Even in weakness, the gangster identity refuses to disappear. Death in prison comes quietly for most. A heart attack in the night, a disease left untreated, a final breath in a cell far from the streets they once ruled. Some are buried in unmarked graves, their names forgotten by all but their families. Others receive media attention, their deaths reported with fascination. their lives summarized in headlines. For the gangster, the final question is always the same. Will they be remembered as kings who fought until the end, or as broken men who faded behind bars? But legacy is not bound by walls. On the outside, their names live on in music, in films, in whispered conversations. Young men idolize them, wearing their faces on shirts, quoting their words as if they were scripture. The gangster myth survives, fed by stories of escapes, riots, betrayals, and resilience. Prison may claim the body, but it rarely silences the legend. For some, the legend even grows in confinement. The fact that they endured, that they resisted, that they bent prison life to their will, this becomes part of the myth that outlives them. And then there are the rare few who walk out, not in a coffin but alive, having served their sentences. For them, freedom is a strange taste, both sweet and bitter. The streets they return to are not the same. Empires are gone, friends are dead, families have moved on. The world is faster, colder, less forgiving. Some try to rebuild, but the old power is gone. The legend may remain, but the reality is different. They are ghosts walking among the living, symbols of a past that no longer exists. Still, even in this exile, some find new meaning. They give interviews, consult on films, sell their stories. They live off their name, off the myth that prison could not erase. For others, the outside world proves too empty, and they fade away quietly, their voices no longer shaping history. The story of gangsters in prison is not one story but many. It is the story of defiance, of men who refuse to bow to walls and chains. It is the story of violence, of riots, escapes, and battles fought in cramped cells. It is the story of decline, of a kings reduced to frailty, of legends slowly silenced by time. And above all, it is the story of legacy. Because no matter how many years they serve, no matter how many cells they occupy, the world continues to remember. For the gangster, prison is not the end. It is a chapter, a brutal, unrelenting chapter that reveals who they truly are. Some break, some adapt, some rise even higher. And when the final gate closes, when the last breath is taken, when the name becomes a memory, one truth remains. The legend of the gangster does not die in a cell. It escapes the bars, lives in stories, and continues to haunt the world long after the man is gone. The story of gangsters behind bars is not just about crime and punishment. It is about the collision of power and confinement, of ego and survival, of men who once bent cities to their will and were then forced to bend to steel and stone. We began with the image the world knows so well, the flashy suits, the cars, the money, the aura of untouchable power. And then we stripped it all away, placing those same men inside cold cells where their names were reduced to numbers and their luxuries to rations. Yet even there, even in that cage, their essence refused to die. Through every chapter, we've seen that prison is not a single story, but many. Some gangsters treated it as an empire waiting to be conquered, turning guards into partners, inmates into soldiers, and contraband into currency. They thrived on the inside the same way they thrived on the streets, through fear, manipulation, and strategy. For them, the bars were not barriers but challenges, and every challenge was an invitation to prove their dominance again. Their stories remind us that true power does not always come from freedom, but from the ability to adapt, to control, to make even the harshest environments bend to your will. Others, though, crumbled beneath the weight of confinement, the silence of long nights, the betrayal of allies, the fading of family ties. These were punishments far greater than the bars themselves. They entered prison as kings, but slowly transformed into ghosts. Their reputations eroded, their confidence consumed. In the eyes of younger inmates, they became relics, reminders of a past era when their names inspired fear. Prison exposed the fragility behind the myth, showing that even legends can break when stripped of their armies and their wealth. We walked through riots where the air burned with smoke and rage, where the carefully ordered system dissolved into chaos. In those moments, gangsters seized opportunity, eliminating enemies, sending messages, stamping their authority in fire and blood. We watched escape attempts that seemed pulled from fiction, tunnels carved beneath walls, helicopters swooping in, guards bribed to look the other way. For a few, freedom came, however briefly. For most, it ended in capture, punishment, or death. But each attempt, each act of defiance, carved their legend deeper into the world's memory. And then came the quiet enemy, time. The body weakening, the mind slowing, the swagger replaced by a limp. No riot or escape can outpace age. In sterile prison hospitals, men who once ruled entire cities sat in wheelchairs, their names barely recognized by those around them. The power that once made nations tremble could not protect them from disease, loneliness, or the slow erosion of memory. This is the truest punishment, the reminder that no empire, no matter how vast, can defeat time. Yet even here in decline, some found a way to shape their legacy. They wrote memoirs, told their stories, manipulated the narrative so that the world remembered them not as broken men, but as figures larger than life. They turned their downfall into myth, transforming their cell into a stage, their words into weapons. Society consumed these tales eagerly, torn between condemning them and glorifying them. And so the gangster lived on, not in power, but in memory, in fascination, in legend. We saw the families caught in the crossfire, the wives who carried burdens, the children who grew distant, the parents who died without their sons by their sides. Prison is not endured by the inmate alone. It stretches outward, gripping everyone connected to them. Some families stayed loyal to the end, carrying messages, visiting faithfully, sacrificing everything. Others broke under the strain, leaving the gangster truly alone. In both cases, the cost of the life was heavy, measured not just in prison years, but in shattered relationships. And when death finally came, it came quietly for most. A heart that stopped in the middle of the night, a final breath in a cell, a body wheeled down a corridor no one would remember. Some were buried in silence, others with media flashing their names one last time. But whether in anonymity or fame, their deaths marked the close of a life lived in extremes, extremes of wealth, extremes of violence, extremes of survival. The gangster's end is rarely peaceful, even if the moment itself is quiet, for their legacy lives on in the way the world continues to tell their stories. This is what makes the tale of gangsters in prison so enduring. It is not just about criminals locked away. It is about human nature stripped raw. Power tested against confinement. Pride tested against humiliation. Strength tested against time. It is about men who refused to bow, even when caged, and men who discovered that cages reveal who they truly are. Some emerge as symbols of defiance, others as warnings of downfall, but all leave behind stories that the world cannot stop repeating. And so we close this journey not with the image of luxury and power that began it, but with the deeper truth. Gangsters in prison are not just inmates. They are kings, dethroned but unbroken, warriors stripped of armies but still fighting, men who lived at the edges of society and continued to defy it even from within. Their lives remind us of the paradox at the heart of the underworld, that true power is fleeting, yet the myth of power can outlast even the man who wielded it. In the end, prison does not silence the legend. It reshapes it. It turns it into something darker, something more mysterious, something that fascinates generation after generation. And as long as there are prisons, as long as there are men who rise through crime and fall through justice, these stories will continue to be told. Because the gangster's life does not end when the cell door closes. It lives on in the whispers of inmates, in the songs of the streets, in the fascination of the public, and in the legacy of names that refuse to die. And perhaps that is the final truth. The body can be caged, but the legend escapes, always.